The first sound was not the splintering of wood, but the shriek of a nightjar, cut short. Anna Rose-Ali, startled from a shallow sleep, sat bolt upright in her cot. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural. The familiar chorus of crickets had ceased, replaced by a waiting stillness that prickled the hairs on her arms. Outside, the moon cast long, skeletal shadows from the lone cottonwood tree that stood sentinel over their small homestead. Then came the crack. A sharp, definitive sound that vibrated through the floorboards of the cabin her father had built with his own hands. It was the sound of the front door frame giving way. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden suffocating quiet. She slid from her bed, her bare feet cold on the rough-hewn planks. Peeking through the sliver of space between her calico curtain and the window frame, she saw them. 3 figures on horseback, silhouetted against the vast, star-dusted canvas of the night sky. A 4th man stood on their porch, a heavy rifle held loosely in his grasp. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long, dark duster that seemed to drink the moonlight. He moved with an unnerving calm, a predator who knew its prey was already trapped. This was no common band of drifters. They moved with a chilling purpose, ignoring the small corral where their 2 horses stood, and the smokehouse filled with cured meat. They wanted something inside. From the main room, she heard her father's voice, low and hard. "State your business." A different voice answered, smooth as polished river stone, yet carrying an edge of cold steel. "I've come for what's mine, Thomas. You've held on to it long enough." Anna knew that voice. She had heard it only once before, in the town of Redemption, a voice that made the air grow cold. Silas Kane, the man who had been buying up land, with a relentless, almost fanatical hunger, his name whispered in tones of fear and resentment. A floorboard creaked near her door. Her father was backing away, moving toward the hearth where he kept his old cavalry pistol. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She had to run. The thought was a raw, primal instinct. Her father had taught her how to survive in this unforgiving land, how to read the signs, how to move without a sound. The back window, he had always told her. If trouble ever comes, you don't fight, Anna. You run. You run, and you don't look back. Her eyes darted around the small room, a desperate inventory of her life. Her worn copy of Evangeline the Pressed Wildflower from her mother's grave, the small wooden bird her father had carved for her last birthday. There was no time. But her hand, acting of its own accord, flew to the small, intricately carved bureau beside her bed. Her fingers closed around the cool, smooth metal of the silver locket. Her mother's locket. The one thing her father had salvaged from the fire that had taken everything else, the one tangible link to a woman she barely remembered. She clutched it tight in her palm as the world outside her room erupted. A deafening roar filled the cabin, the sound of her father's pistol. It was answered immediately by the deeper, heavier boom of a rifle. A sickening thud followed a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. A sob tore from Anna's throat, but she choked it back, turning it into a gasp for air. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. Survival was the only currency that mattered now. She slipped the locket's chain over her head, the cold metal a shock against her warm skin. With practiced silence, she eased open the small wooden window at the back of her room. The smell of dust and dry sagebrush filled her lungs. She could hear the men's boots on the floorboards now moving through the main room with methodical slowness. "Check the girls' room," the cold voice of Silas Kane commanded, his tone devoid of any emotion. Panic, cold and sharp, spurred her into motion. She scrambled through the window, her thin nightdress snagging on a splinter. She landed softly in the dirt, the impact jarring her teeth. Crouching low, she skirted the edge of the cabin, the pale moonlight her enemy. The smell of kerosene was suddenly sharp in the air, a cloying chemical scent that spoke of deliberate destruction. As she reached the corner of the house, a flicker of orange caught her eye. One of the men was dousing the front porch with oil from a canister. Cain stood watching his face, illuminated by the growing flame. It was a face of stark angles and shadows, his eyes dark and unreadable. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was scanning the surrounding darkness, his gaze sweeping the landscape with an unnerving intelligence. He wasn't just an outlaw. He was a hunter. And she was his prey. Anna didn't wait to see more. She turned and ran, her bare feet pounding against the hard, unforgiving earth. She plunged into the scrub brush and mesquite, the thorny branches tearing at her skin and clothes, leaving stinging trails of blood. Behind her, the fire took hold with a hungry roar, casting a hellish, dancing light against the night sky. The homestead that had been her entire world was being erased, consumed by a fire born of cold, calculated malice. She did not look back. She clutched the silver locket at her throat, its familiar weight the only anchor in a world that had just been torn from its moorings. She ran until her lungs burned, and her legs screamed in protest. The image of Silas Cain's impassive face burned into her mind, a terrifying promise of the relentless pursuit she knew would follow. She was alone, fleeing into the vast, indifferent wilderness, haunted by the echoes of a life that had just been stolen from her. The desert was a crucible, designed to burn away all that was weak and leave only the hard, unyielding core of what remained. For 2 days, Anna ran, walked, and crawled through that crucible. The scorching sun bleached the cracked earth white, and the horizon shimmered with heat-born mirages that promised water and delivered only more sand and stone. The landscape was a vast, silent expanse of red rock and pale, thirsty earth, glowing like embers under the setting sun. Her thin nightdress was in tatters, her feet were a raw, bleeding testament to her flight, and the silver locket was a searing brand against her sunburnt skin. Thirst was a living thing inside her, a creature with claws that scraped at her throat and filled her head with a dull, throbbing ache. The world began to lose its sharp edges, blurring into a sweltering haze of pain and exhaustion. Her memories, too, began to blur and warp. The recent horror of the fire mixed with older, more fragmented nightmares that had plagued her since childhood. Flashes of another fire long ago, the smell of smoke, thick and acrid. The sound of shouting, not in English, but in a language she didn't understand. Her father's face, younger, harder, streaked with soot. These were ghosts she had always lived with, whispers from a past she couldn't grasp. Now, in her delirium, they felt more real than the burning ground beneath her. Her father, Thomas Ali. In the town of Redemption and the surrounding territories, he was a legend. A man who had helped pacify the frontier, a former soldier who had carved a life from the wild land with grit and honor. People spoke of his courage, his unwavering sense of justice. He was a good man, a hero. The thought was a mantra she repeated to herself, a shield against the encroaching madness of the heat. Silas Cain was a monster, a land-grabbing tyrant who had murdered a hero. The motive was simple, she told herself. Greed. Cain wanted their land, the land with the best access to the Sweetwater Creek. It had to be that simple, but a nagging inconsistency pricked at her, even through the fog of her pain. Cain's men had moved with the precision of soldiers, not the sloppy chaos of bandits. They hadn't stolen horses or tools. They had searched the house meticulously before they burned it. It was as if they were looking for something small, something specific, something she now held clutched in her hand. On the 3rd day, the world dissolved completely. The red earth tilted, the blue sky spun, and she fell into a darkness that was a welcome relief from the blinding sun. When consciousness returned, it came in pieces. The first sensation was coolness, not on her skin, but inside her, a trickle of water over her cracked lips, a gift so profound it felt like a dream. The second was the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat, a scent that made her empty stomach clench with a pain that was almost unbearable. She forced her eyes open. The world swam into focus slowly. She was lying on a soft bison hide under the shade of a makeshift lean-to made of stretched animal skins. A small smokeless fire crackled nearby. Towering red rock formations surrounded her, a natural fortress that hid this small camp from the outside world. A figure sat by the fire, his back to her. He was broad-shouldered with long black hair braided down his back. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple tunic. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, tending to a piece of meat roasting on a stick. As if sensing her gaze, he turned his head. His face was a mask of weathered lines, and quiet strength, his dark eyes holding the wisdom of the ancient land itself. There was no surprise in his expression, only a calm, steady assessment. He was Comanche. She knew this from the style of his braids and the intricate beadwork on his moccasins. She had stumbled into the heart of the territory her people had fought so hard to claim, into the camp of a man whose people her father had pacified. Fear, a cold and familiar companion, washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a desperate, illogical surge of hope. This man was her only chance. She tried to speak, but her voice was a dry, rasping whisper. Water. She managed the single word, a monumental effort. The man rose without a word and came to her side. He held a small clay cup to her lips, and she drank the cool liquid a balm to her ravaged throat. He watched her, his expression unreadable. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. His English was clear-accented but precise. "Anna," she croaked. "Anna Rose Ali." He showed no reaction to her name, though the name Ali was known throughout the territory. He simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. "You were close to death. The sun had nearly claimed you. They're hunting me." She whispered the words, tumbling out in a rush. "A man named Cain. He killed my father. He burned our home." The warrior's face remained a stony mask, but a flicker of something, interest perhaps, or recognition, stirred in the depths of his eyes. "Silas Cain." He said the name, a flat statement, not a question. "You know him. I know the scent of the vulture when it circles." He replied, his words laced with a meaning that went far beyond their simple translation. He looked from her face down to her clenched fist, which still held the silver locket. "The world of the white man is full of vultures. They feed on their own kind. This is not my fight." He turned to walk back to the fire, a clear dismissal. Panic seized Anna. She couldn't be left alone. She pushed herself up onto one elbow, the movement sending a wave of dizziness through her. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I have nowhere else to go. They will find me." The warrior paused, his back still to her. "The hawk does not hunt by flying into the storm. It waits. It watches. You have brought the storm to my door. I can work," she said, her desperation making her bold. "I can cook, I can mend, I can track. My father taught me." He turned slowly, a ghost of a skeptical smile touching his lips. "You track?" "I can," she insisted. "I know this land." He considered her for a long moment, his eyes seeming to peer directly into her soul, weighing her, measuring her. She saw in him a profound loneliness, a self-imposed exile. He was a man apart, not just from her world, but perhaps from his own as well. "My name is Keme," he said finally. It was not an offer of friendship, but a simple statement of fact. "Rest, eat. When your strength returns, you will leave. The desert will decide your fate." He turned back to the fire, the conversation over. Anna lay back on the bison hide, her body aching, her heart a confusion of terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Kemi had not offered her sanctuary, only a temporary reprieve. But for now it was enough. She had survived the desert. Now she had to survive the man who had saved her from it, and earn the trust of a warrior who had every reason to despise her and everything she represented. The storm was coming, and she was standing at its center. For 3 days, a silent truce existed between them. Anna's strength returned slowly, nourished by Keme's food, tough, smoky strips of jerky, and a bitter but hydrating tea brewed from desert herbs. She spoke little, and he spoke less. He moved about his small, orderly camp with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. Every action had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. He was a man in perfect harmony with his environment, a part of the landscape, in a way Anna, who had lived here her entire life, could never be. Kem, for his part, watched her. He observed her as he would a new species of animal that had wandered into his territory with a detached, analytical curiosity. He watched as she painstakingly repaired the tears in her tattered nightdress with a bone needle and thread he wordlessly left by her sleeping hide. He watched as she cleaned his cooking utensils in the sand without being asked. He watched as she sat for hours staring out at the rock formations, her hand never far from the silver locket at her throat. On the 4th morning, he stood before her, a water skin and a small pouch of jerky in his hand. "Your strength has returned," he stated. "The path to the east leads toward the settlement you call redemption. It is a day's walk." The finality in his tone sent a fresh wave of fear through Anna. Cain's men would be everywhere. They would be watching the towns, the trails. To walk into redemption alone was a death sentence. "He'll be waiting," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Cain, he won't have given up." "That is your concern," Kemi replied, his face impassive. "He killed my father in cold blood," she pressed, standing to face him. "He is a murderer, a thief. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Keme's dark eyes narrowed slightly. "Your father was Thomas Ali, the soldier, the man who brought the peace of the rifle to my people. Your world's justice is a tangled root. I will not be caught in it." The words were a physical blow. She knew of her father's past, of course, but she knew it through the triumphant lens of the settlers, a heroic campaign to make the land safe. Hearing it from Keme's perspective stripped away the glory, leaving only the brutal truth of conquest. Still, she could not let it go. Not. "This isn't about the past," she argued, her voice rising with passion. "This is about a man who is a threat to everyone, your people included. A man who burns homes and murders families will not stop at the edge of his own land. He will consume everything." She saw a flicker in his eyes. She had touched a nerve. She decided to prove her worth, to show him she was not the helpless girl he had found in the desert. "Yesterday you went south to check your snares," she said, her gaze steady. "You were followed." Keme's stoic demeanor cracked. A dangerous stillness fell over him. "How do you know this?" "The tracker was clumsy," she explained, her father's lessons coming back to her with surprising clarity. "He left a boot print near the dry wash, heavier on the left side, which means he has a limp. He broke a branch of creosote bush that was too high to be an animal. And on the wind, I smelled tobacco. You do not smoke." Keme's eyes searched her face, his initial disbelief warring with the undeniable logic of her observations. He had been so confident in his solitude, so sure of his mastery over this domain, that the possibility of being followed without his knowledge was a profound insult. "Show me," he commanded. She led him from the sheltered camp, her bare feet now calloused and tough, moving confidently over the rocky ground. She took him to the dry wash and pointed to the faint impression in the sand, an indentation that was almost invisible to an untrained eye. She showed him the bruised, broken stem on the creosote bush, its pungent, oily leaves still releasing their scent. Keme knelt, examining the evidence. He ran his fingers over the scuffed earth, his expression unreadable. For a long time, he was silent. When he finally rose, he looked at her with a new respect. "He is one of Cain's," he said. "I have seen them from the cliffs. They ride with military discipline." "They're looking for me," Anna whispered. And for this, she pulled the locket from beneath her dress. The silver was tarnished with sweat and dust, but it still gleamed in the harsh sunlight. Keme looked at the object, his gaze intense. A small silver trinket. He burned your home for this. I don't know, she admitted. It was my mother's. It's all I have left of her. Keme seemed to make a decision. The wall of detached indifference he had maintained for days finally crumbled. The jackal that grows too bold must be dealt with, or it will steal the kill from the wolf. Cain's reach is long. If he sent a tracker this deep into my territory, he will not stop. He looked at her, his eyes hard. You wish to fight this man. I want to understand why she said the words coming from the very core of her being, and I want justice for my father. Justice is a river that often flows with blood. Keme said, his voice a low warning. To find the truth you seek, you must go to the heart of the spider's web. We will go to redemption. The journey to redemption was a lesson in the unseen world. Keme moved through the landscape like a spirit following game trails and dry riverbeds that kept them hidden from the open plains. He taught Anna how to muffle the sound of her footsteps with balls of grass tied to her feet, and how to read the flight of a hawk as a sign of riders in the distance. Under his tutelage, the desert transformed from an adversary into a complex tapestry of signs and symbols. She felt her fears slowly being replaced by a sharp, focused awareness. They arrived at the edge of the town at dusk. Redemption was a place of stark and jarring contrasts. On the main street, the newly constructed assayer's office and a mercantile with a freshly painted sign stood proudly next to sun-bleached abandoned shacks with boarded-up windows, their timbers groaning in the wind. It was a town struggling to be born from the ashes of a violent past, a symbol of a community caught between hope and decay. Keme stopped at the edge of town, concealed in a thicket of mesquite. I will not go further, he said. My face is not welcome there. Anna nodded, understanding. What should I look for? Listen, he advised. People's tongues are loosened by drink and fear. The saloon is where the town's heart beats. Learn what Cain has done since the fire. Learn who he has threatened. Find the pattern. Disguised in a dusty poncho Keme had given her, Anna slipped into the dim, smoky interior of the Red Dog Saloon. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer sweat and cheap perfume. A tinny piano plinked a mournful tune in the corner as rough-looking men played cards and drank whiskey. She kept her head down and made her way to the bar, taking a seat at the far end where the shadows were deepest. The bartender, a large man with a florid face and a surprisingly gentle demeanor, wiped the counter in front of her. What can I get for you, miss? Just water, she said, her voice low. She pushed a coin across the bar. The bartender slid a glass of cloudy water toward her. He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. You'd be wise to stay clear of this town. There's a bad wind blowing through here. Ever since Silas Cain rode in, I've heard the name Anna, said, feigning indifference. Heard it, the man scoffed. He's a ghost, that one. Bought up the old Miller place for pennies on the dollar after their well went dry. Then the Jackson Ranch after their prize bull was found dead. Always seems to be a tragedy right before Mr. Cain makes a generous offer. He paused, his eyes darting around the room. And now, poor Thomas Ali. A fire. Terrible business. Cain's men are all over saying it was a stray spark from the hearth. But nobody's buying it. Anna's blood ran cold. He was systematically taking over the entire valley. Which families has he bought out? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The bartender began to list them. The Millers, the Jacksons, the Carvers, and old Elias Thorne, the blacksmith. Cain's been pressuring him something fierce for his property by the old mission ruins. A grizzled man with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest walked in his face a roadmap of weariness and cynicism. He nodded to the bartender and leaned against the counter near Anna. Evening, Sheriff, the bartender said. Evening, Gus, the sheriff grunted. He downed a shot of whiskey in one swallow. Kane's men again, riding the perimeter of the Ali place like they own it, which I suppose they soon will. Nothing I can do? No proof. It ain't right, Sheriff Gus said. Right ain't got much to do with the law these days, the sheriff replied, his voice laced with resignation. He looked over at Anna, his eyes narrowed with professional suspicion. You're new here. Just passing through, Anna said quickly, pulling her poncho tighter. The sheriff grunted again and walked away. The names the bartender had listed echoed in Anna's mind. Miller, Jackson, Carver, Thorne, Ali. It wasn't random. There had to be a connection. These were the oldest families in the territory, the ones who had settled here with her father 2 decades ago after the Comanche Wars. They were the pioneers who had fought in the final raid, the one that had broken the last resistance and brought peace to the valley. Her nightmares flared in her memory, the fire, the shouting. Was it possible they weren't just dreams? Was this all connected to that one bloody event from 20 years ago? She slipped out of the saloon, her heart pounding with a new and terrifying suspicion. She met Kame at their prearranged spot, and the moon casting long shadows around them. Kane is targeting the families, she said, her voice a breathless rush. The ones who rode with my father in the last raid. The one at Whisper Creek. Keme's face, already stern, hardened into granite. He knew the name. Every Comanche knew the name. It was not a raid. It was a massacre. He is not just taking land, Keme said, his voice low and dangerous. He is erasing a history. But why? Anna asked, her mind reeling. What does he have to gain? As she spoke, her hand went to the locket, its familiar shape a source of comfort. But now it felt different. Heavy, almost alien. For her entire life, she had believed it held a tiny painted portrait of her mother, a woman with a gentle smile and kind eyes, as her father had described her. But he had sealed it shut after the first fire, claiming the heat had fused the clasp. He'd said it was to protect the delicate painting within. A sudden, overwhelming compulsion seized her. She had to know. She had to see what was inside. Her father's story, her family's legacy, the very ground beneath her feet. It all felt like it was built on a foundation of lies. I have to open it, she whispered, more to herself than to Kemi. She worked at the clasp with her fingernails, but it wouldn't budge. It was as her father had said, fused shut. Keme watched her frantic efforts, then held out his hand. Let me see. She hesitated for a moment before placing the locket in his palm. He examined it, turning it over and over. He then drew a thin, wickedly sharp knife from his belt. With the precision of a surgeon, he inserted the tip into the tiny seam of the clasp and twisted. There was a faint click. The locket sprang open. Keme handed it back to her. Anna's hand trembled as she held it. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken secrets. She took a deep breath and looked down. There was no painted portrait of a woman with a gentle smile. Instead, nestled behind the small oval of glass, was a faded sepia-toned photograph. It was a picture of a woman she had never seen before. Her dark hair pulled back from a face of striking, almost severe beauty. Her expression was not gentle. It was proud, defiant. And in her arms, she held a small boy, no older than 2, with wide, serious eyes. They were strangers. An unknown woman and child had been lying against her heart for her entire life. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The foundation of her world didn't just have cracks. It had completely given way, plunging her into a disorienting abyss. Who were these people? Why would her father carry their picture in a locket he claimed belonged to his wife? From the edge of town, a man's voice called out sharp with authority. "Heard a noise over here, check it out." They had been discovered. Kim grabbed her arm. "We must go, now," as they melted back into the shadows of the wilderness. Anna's mind was a maelstrom of confusion and betrayal. The raid that targeted families, the strange photograph, it was all a puzzle. And she was missing the most important piece. At the same time, deep in the town of Redemption, Silas Kane stood in the lamplight of his commandeered office, staring at a map of the valley. Every parcel of land he had acquired was marked with a black X. Only two remained: the Ali homestead and the Thorn blacksmith shop. "She's a ghost," one of his men said, the man with a limp. "Searched the whole desert. It's like she vanished." Cain didn't look up from the map. His voice was calm, almost dangerously so. "Ghosts leave traces. She has something that belongs to me. Not the land, not the deed. Something much more valuable." He tapped a long, elegant finger on the map on the spot marking the Ali homestead. "She has the heart of the plains, and I will tear this entire valley apart stone by stone to get it back." The revelation in the locket shattered Anna's world, replacing the certainties of her past with a constellation of terrifying questions. Keme led them deep into the labyrinthine canyons, his pace swift and silent, putting miles between them and redemption before the sun rose. They found shelter in a shallow cave overlooking a vast, empty plain, a place where no one would think to look for them. For a full day, Anna barely spoke. She sat with the open locket in her hands, staring at the faces of the woman and child until their features were etched into her mind. They were not just strangers. Their presence felt like an accusation, a silent testament to a secret her father had taken to his grave. Keme respected her silence, understanding that she was grieving not for the father she thought she knew, but for the loss of the truth itself. He hunted, he kept watch, he maintained the quiet rhythm of their survival while she wrestled with the ghosts that now haunted her. "He lied to me," she finally said, her voice hoarse as they sat by a small, hidden fire on the second night. "My whole life he lied." Men often build their homes on foundations of convenient truths. Keme observed his eyes on the dancing flames. "It is easier than living with the weight of what they have done." "But why them?" she asked, holding the locket out to him. "Who are they?" Keme took it, his gaze lingering on the photograph. A deep sadness seemed to settle over him. "I do not know their names, but I have seen faces like hers before. Settlers, homesteaders who came before the big ranches. They believed the land could be shared. They tried to trade with my people, not fight them. They were different." He paused, his voice dropping. "Most of them are gone now, wiped out by the fighting or by men who wanted all the land for themselves." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was darker and more complex than simple greed. Cain wasn't just buying land. He was reclaiming it. He was targeting the men who had participated in the Whisper Creek raid. Her father had been their leader. Whisper Creek. Anna whispered the name. "My father always called it a great victory. He said it secured the valley for settlement. For your people, perhaps," Keme said, his voice hard. "For mine, it was the day the earth wept blood. But the story your people tell is that Thomas Ali and his men fought a band of renegade warriors." He looked at her, his eyes piercing. "The woman in this picture is not a warrior's wife. She is a homesteader." The implication was monstrous. Her father, the hero, hadn't led a charge against hostile natives. He had led an attack on a settlement. He had participated in a massacre of innocent people. And this locket, this was not a memento. It was a trophy. Before Anna could process the full weight of this horror, the sound of a distant gunshot echoed through the canyon, startling a flock of birds from the cliffs above. It was a single, deliberate shot, not the sound of a hunter. Keme was on his feet in an instant, his body tense. He scaled the rock face beside their cave with the agility of a mountain cat peering over the edge toward redemption. After a long moment, he slid back down, his face grim. "Smoke," he said, from the edge of town, near the old mission. A cold dread settled in Anna's stomach. The blacksmith shop, she breathed. Elias Thorne. He was the last one on Cain's list. They traveled fast, keeping to the high ground, a sense of impending doom hurrying their steps. As they drew closer, the scene below came into focus. The blacksmith shop was a smoldering ruin. A small crowd of townsfolk stood nearby, kept at bay by a line of Cain's black-clad riders. In the center of the clearing, near the crumbling adobe walls of the old Spanish mission, a crude gallows had been erected. And standing on the platform, his hands bound behind his back and a noose around his neck, was Elias Thorne. The old blacksmith was a friend of her father's, a kind man who had always given her a piece of licorice when she was a child. His face was bruised and swollen, but his eyes were filled with defiance. Silas Cain stood beside him, calm and composed, addressing the silent, terrified crowd. His voice, amplified by the natural acoustics of the canyon, carried clearly to where Anna and Kimi were hidden. "This man, Elias Thorne, stands accused of arson and treason." Cain announced, his tone reasonable, almost gentle. "He conspired to burn down his own property to sow chaos and undermine the peace I have worked so hard to bring to this valley." It was a brazen theatrical lie. He was turning the town's fear into a weapon. However, Cain continued, a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips. "I am a merciful man. His life will be spared, in exchange for the return of stolen property. Anna Ali has fled into the desert with an item of great personal value to me. An heirloom. A silver locket. He knew. He knew she had it, and he knew she would hear about this. It was a trap, and she was the bait. She has until sundown tomorrow to present herself here and return what is mine," Cain declared. "If she does not, Mr. Thorne will pay the price for her cowardice." Cain's men forced the crowd to disperse, leaving the old blacksmith standing alone on the gallows, a grim monument to Cain's power. 2 guards were posted at a distance, ensuring no one attempted a rescue. Anna sank to her knees, the weight of the choice before her crushing her. If she went, Cain would kill her and take the locket. If she didn't, an innocent man would die. "He has left you no path that does not lead to bloodshed," Keme said softly, coming to her side. "It's my fault," she whispered, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. "Elias is going to die because of me. Because of this." She held up the locket. "No," Keme said, his voice firm. "He is going to die because of what your father did 20 years ago. This is the final move in a long game. Cain does not want you. He wants to complete his revenge. And he wants to do it on the very ground where his life was destroyed." "What do you mean?" The old mission, Keme said, his eyes fixed on the crumbling structure. "That is where the Whisper Creek settlement stood. Your father and his men did not just attack them, they burned them out. Right there." The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Cain wasn't just executing a man. He was staging a grim reenactment. He was forcing Anna to return to the scene of the original crime, to face him. A new resolve hardened inside Anna, displacing her fear. This was no longer just about her father or a stolen locket. It was about Elias, about the truth, and about stopping the cycle of violence that had poisoned this valley for 2 decades. "I'm going," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I'm not going to surrender." She looked at Keme, her eyes pleading. "Will you help me?" Keme looked from her determined face to the lone figure on the gallows, then to the mission ruins, a place of sorrow for his own people as well. He had tried to remain apart from the white man's world, to live in his self-imposed exile. But the storm had not just come to his door, it had engulfed the entire land. "The coyote is a clever hunter," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "But it can be outsmarted if you know the terrain." He looked toward the sky, where dark, bruised-looking clouds were beginning to gather on the horizon. "And sometimes the hawk uses the storm to its advantage. A sandstorm is coming. We will use the wind and the chaos. He wants a stage for his final act. We will give him one." The air grew heavy and still, a suffocating blanket of anticipation. The sky to the west turned a sickly yellow-brown, the vanguard of the approaching sandstorm. The wind began to pick up, whining through the canyons and kicking up small dust devils that danced across the plain like frantic ghosts. In the eerie ochre light, the ruins of the old Spanish mission looked like the skeleton of some great forgotten beast. Anna and Keme, moved under the cover of the rising wind, using the gullies and rockfalls as their path. They carried no rifles, only Keime's bow and knife, and Anna's newfound iron-willed resolve. Their plan was desperate, relying on precision surprise and the fury of the storm. As they reached the ridge overlooking the mission, the first gusts of sand-laden wind tore at them, stinging their exposed skin. Below, Kane's men were struggling to keep their footing, their horses stamping nervously. Kane himself stood impassively near the gallows, his long duster whipping around him, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if he were personally summoning the storm. "He is waiting for you to walk in through the front," Keime whispered, his voice nearly lost in the wind's howl. "We will not." He pointed to a collapsed section of the mission's rear wall, a dark maw leading into the crumbling nave. "I will create a diversion. Draw the guards away from Thorn. When I do, you get him down. Bring him inside the mission. The storm will cover your tracks." And you, Anna, asked, her heart pounding with fear for him. "I am the wind and the rock and the shadow," he said simply. "I will find you." Before she could object, he was gone, melting into the swirling dust and chaos. Anna watched the scene below, her senses on fire. The wind was a physical force, now shrieking like a banshee, and the sky had darkened to a twilight gloom, though it was only late afternoon. The mission's old cracked bell, hanging precariously in its crumbling tower, began to sway its rusty tongue, striking the sides with a dissonant clanging toll, a funeral dirge for the dying day. Suddenly, from the rocks on the far side of the clearing, an arrow hissed through the air and embedded itself in the wooden post of the gallows, inches from a guard's head. The man yelped in surprise. Another arrow struck the ground near his feet. The two guards, startled and confused, drew their pistols and ran toward the rocks, shouting into the wind. It was her chance. Anna scrambled down the embankment, the sand and grit blinding her. She ran low and fast across the exposed ground, expecting a shout or a gunshot at any moment. But the guards were gone, and Kane's attention seemed to be fixed on the diversion. She reached the gallows, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias Thorne's eyes widened in disbelief. "Anna, child, what are you doing? It's a trap." "I know," she said, pulling Keime's knife from her belt. "I'm not leaving you here." She sawed at the thick rope binding his wrists. The hemp was coarse and strong, and the knife felt clumsy in her trembling hands. The mission bell tolled again, louder this time, a frantic clanging alarm. "Hurry, child," Elias urged, his eyes darting toward Kane. The rope finally gave way. She turned to the noose, her fingers fumbling with the complex knot. Just as she loosened it, a voice, calm and chillingly close, cut through the wind. Such a touching display of loyalty. Anna froze. Silas Kane stood not 20 feet away, a pistol in his hand, aimed directly at her heart. The two guards were behind him, their own weapons trained on her and Elias. Keime's diversion had failed. It had all been part of the trap. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist a heroic gesture," Kane said, walking slowly toward them. The wind whipped his hair across his face, but his eyes were steady and burning with a cold fire. "It runs in your blood, it seems. Theatricality. Folly. Let him go, Kane," Anna said, stepping in front of Elias, shielding him with her body. "This is between you and me. Oh, it has always been between you and me." Kane agreed, his voice a silken threat. "Or rather, what you carry." He gestured with his pistol. "The locket. Give it to me." Slowly, her hands shaking, Anna reached up and pulled the silver locket from around her neck. She held it out on her open palm. Kane's eyes fixed on it, and for the first time, his mask of cold control slipped. A flicker of raw, agonizing pain crossed his features, so profound it was shocking. He looked like a man staring at the ghost of his entire world. 20 years, he breathed the words, almost a prayer. 20 years I have hunted for this. He stepped forward to take it. But Anna closed her fist around it. "First, you tell me why," she demanded, her voice rising above the storm. "Why did you kill my father? Why are you destroying all these families? Who is in this photograph?" Kane let out a short, bitter laugh that was quickly swallowed by the wind. Your father didn't tell you, of course not. The great Thomas Ali, hero of the plains, would never speak of his greatest shame. He gestured toward the crumbling mission walls behind them. This was not always a ruin. This was a community, a settlement of families who wanted nothing to do with the war your government was waging. They were farmers, blacksmiths, people who believed in peace, people who traded with the Comanche, who learned their ways. He took another step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. My people? The confession hung in the swirling dust between them. Your father was ordered to clear this territory of all hostiles. Cain continued, his voice dripping with venom. He and his men, the Millers, the Jacksons, the Carvers. Your friend Thorne here, they rode in at dawn. They were told there was a war party of Comanche hiding here. But there were no warriors, only men, women, and children. Cain's composure finally broke, his voice cracking with a grief that was still raw after 2 decades. My wife, Sarah, my son, Jacob, they were in that photograph. They were here. I was away trading for supplies. He pointed a trembling finger at the locket in her hand. That was my wedding gift to her. The heart of the plains, she called it. Your father did not just lead a massacre, Anna. He looted the bodies. He took that from my wife's neck as a trophy of his great victory. The terrible truth crashed down on Anna with the force of a physical blow. Her father wasn't a hero. He was a war criminal, a murderer, a thief. The nightmares, the fire, the shouting, it was all real. No, she whispered, shaking her head, the denial a hollow, desperate reflex. Yes. Cain roared, his face contorted in anguish. He knew a homesteader who survived the initial attack rode out to meet them waving a white flag, screaming that they were peaceful settlers, that they were citizens. Your father shot him where he stood and ordered his men to finish the job. He knew they were innocent. This secondary revelation was the final devastating twist of the knife. It wasn't a mistake. It was a conscious choice, an act of pure, unadulterated evil. I have spent 20 years, Cain said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, dismantling his legacy, ruining the men who rode with him, taking the land they stole. And all I wanted was to get that back, the last piece of my family, the last thing he touched. Suddenly, from the bell tower above, a figure emerged from the swirling sand. It was Keem. He drew his bow, the arrow pointed directly at Cain's heart. It is over, Cain Keme's voice boomed. Your vengeance has consumed you. Cain laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. It ends here where it began, he screamed, turning his pistol from Anna toward Keem. In that split second, as Cain turned, Anna acted. Fueled by a blinding surge of rage and grief for the family she never knew, and the father she had been deceived by, she lunged forward. She didn't aim for the gun. She slammed her hand, the one clutching the locket, into Cain's chest. The impact was jarring. Cain staggered back, surprise on his face. He fired his pistol, but the shot went wild, ricocheting off the mission bell with a deafening clang. The ancient metal, already weakened, fractured under the impact. With a groan of tortured metal and stone, the massive bell tore loose from its moorings. It fell not on them, but on the wooden platform of the gallows, which stood directly beneath the tower. The structure collapsed like a house of cards, sending a cloud of splintered wood and dust into the air. The distraction was all Cain needed. An arrow flew, not at Cain, but at the pistol in his hand, striking his wrist with brutal force. The gun clattered to the ground. Cain cried out in pain, clutching his arm. He stared defeated as Anna, Elias, and Keme stood united against him. The storm raged, the truth was out, and his long-planned revenge had crumbled into dust, just like the settlement he had lost. His spirit, broken by the futility of it all, finally gave out. He fell to his knees, a solitary, tragic figure weeping in the heart of the storm he had created. The sandstorm blew itself out by dawn, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and unnaturally quiet. The sky was a pale, fragile blue, and the air smelled of rain-washed dust and wet creosote. Silas Kane was gone. In the chaos of the storm's aftermath, he had simply vanished, leaving behind only his pistol and the ruins of his vengeance. His men, their leader broken, and their purpose lost, had scattered like leaves in the wind. Elias Thorne, shaken but unharmed, had been taken back to the town where the dazed citizens were just beginning to piece together the truth of the last 20 years. Anna sat with Keme on the ridge overlooking the valley, the mission a silent, scarred monument below them. The silver locket lay on the rock between them, open the faces of the woman and child, staring up at the empty sky. Anna felt hollowed out, scoured clean like the landscape. The man she had called father was a stranger, a monster cloaked in the guise of a hero. Her entire life, her very identity had been built upon a crime. He was my father. She said the words feeling foreign in her mouth. I loved him. How could I have loved a man who did that? You loved the man who raised you. Keme said, his voice gentle. The man who carved you birds from wood and taught you how to read the stars. You did not know the soldier, the man who carried the ghosts of war inside him. People are not one thing, Anna. They are a river with a calm surface and a dark, violent current underneath. She picked up the locket, its weight feeling immense. What do I do now? This land, this legacy, it's all stained with blood. Blood can be washed away, Keme replied, or it can be used to nourish new growth. The choice is yours. You are not your father's sins. You are his daughter. You decide what the name Ali will mean from this day forward. His words were a seed of hope planted in the barren soil of her grief. For the first time since the fire, she saw a path forward, not back to the life she had lost, but toward a new one she could build herself. In the weeks that followed, Anna became a quiet force of change in redemption. She met with the town council and the families Kane had displaced. With a clarity and resolve that surprised everyone, she laid out her plan. She was the legal heir to the Ali homestead, the largest and most prosperous ranch in the valley. She announced she would be selling it, but she didn't sell to a single buyer. She broke up the vast tract of land, selling off parcels at fair prices to the families who had lost their homes, giving them a chance to start again. With the remaining funds, she established a trust not for herself, but for the community, to build a proper school, to dig a new town well, and to fund a trading post. A trading post to be built near the mission, on the very land that had seen so much division, intended as a place of fair trade for settlers and natives alike. It was an act of profound atonement, a way of transforming her father's blood-soaked legacy into a foundation for peace. One cool autumn morning, when the last of the land deeds had been signed and the foundation for the new trading post had been laid, Anna rode out alone. She traveled east toward a desolate, windswept bluff that Kame had described to her. There were no markers, no stones, only a cluster of hardy junipers clinging to the rocky soil. This was the place, he had told her, where the few survivors of the Whisper Creek massacre had buried their dead. This was the unmarked grave of Sarah and Jacob Kane. She dismounted and knelt on the dry, hard ground. The wind whispered through the juniper branches, a mournful sighing sound. From her saddlebag, she took a small trowel and the silver locket. She began to dig the small tool scraping against the rocky earth. She dug a small, neat hole, deep enough to protect its contents from the elements. With a final look at the proud, defiant face of the woman and the wide, serious eyes of the boy, she closed the locket. She held it in her hand for a moment, a final silent apology for the sins of her father, and a farewell to the ghost of a man who had stolen it. Then she placed it in the earth and covered it over, packing the dirt down firmly. She placed a single smooth river stone on top of the small mound. It was not an act of justice for Silas Kane. His path was his own. This was for her. It was an act of liberation, of burying the past, so that a future could grow. As she stood, a sense of peace settled over her, a quiet, clean feeling she hadn't experienced in a lifetime. She was no longer defined by the locket or by the man who had given it to her. She was simply Anna. She turned to ride back toward redemption, toward her new life. As she mounted her horse, she saw a figure riding toward her from the valley below. It was Cain. He rode not as a fleeting visitor from the wilderness, but as a man with a purpose. He pulled up beside her, his expression calm and steady. "The first timbers for the trading post arrived this morning," he said. "I saw," she replied, a small smile touching her lips. They sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the valley, a land of harsh beauty and hard-won hope. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held them captive. "I thought you would be returning to your solitude in the canyons," Anna said softly. Keme looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not the lonely exile, but a man who had found a new reason to stay. "The hawk can hunt in the storm," he said, his words a quiet promise. "But it is better to build a nest where there is peace. Someone must ensure the trade is fair." Anna's smile widened. It was not a future she could have ever imagined, but it felt right. It felt like hope. Together, they turned their horses and rode down from the bluff, not as a white woman and a Comanche warrior, not as representatives of a divided past, but as partners riding side by side toward the horizon, ready to build a new community, a new legacy together.